At first, it was just the wind, that strange kind of breeze that comes out of nowhere and makes the trees rustle as if they're whispering secrets you're not meant to hear. I remember glancing out the kitchen window while pouring Eileen her morning coffee. The sky had that soft blue hue, nothing out of the ordinary, until gradually the light began to change. Not suddenly. It crept up on us, turning yellow, then amber, and finally a thick, terrifying orange. The kind of orange that doesn't belong to a sunrise or sunset, but to something unnatural, something wrong. We live in a small wooden home nestled deep in the hills of Northern California, surrounded by pine trees and wild sage. For 43 years, this land has been our sanctuary, quiet, green, alive. Eileen and I built this house ourselves back in the 70s. I still remember the smell of fresh-cut cedar and how she painted the porch railing white, humming to herself as she worked. Our children played in these woods, and now our grandchildren come to visit every summer. It's not just a house, it's our whole life rooted into timber and soil. That morning, there were no evacuation sirens, no calls, no urgent knock at the door, just the wind, whispering louder. By the time we stepped out onto the porch, the air already smelled like burning resin. Eileen clutched my arm and said, "Why does the sky look like that, Harold?" I didn't have an answer. The birds were gone. That was the first sign something was terribly wrong. No chirping, no fluttering wings, just silence, as if nature itself had paused in anticipation. I turned on the radio. Nothing but static. Then I switched to our old battery-powered one. Finally, a voice came through, weak and broken up by interference. "Wildfire near, evacuations recommended for..." And then it cut off. But that was enough. I grabbed our emergency kit from the closet, just as we rehearsed in those fire preparedness pamphlets they send every year. But as I looked at the bag in my hands, it hit me like a hammer. We hadn't rehearsed this in years. Batteries had expired. Canned food was outdated. My phone had no service, and our landline, disconnected months ago to cut costs, now felt like a fatal mistake. Eileen wanted to leave immediately, but I insisted on checking the perimeter of the property. I told her I'd be just a few minutes. I needed to see how close it was. I walked past our shed, toward the fence that separated our property from the national forest, and that's when I saw it. The smoke rising behind the tree line like a great beast waking from slumber. Black, billowing, and fast. Far faster than I expected. When I got back to the house, Eileen was already packing photo albums into a bag. "We need to go now," she said, her voice trembling. But it wasn't just the fear in her eyes that shook me. It was the reflection of flames already dancing in the kitchen window. The fire wasn't approaching, it was already here. I rushed to start the truck, but the engine stuttered. Once, twice, nothing. The battery had been acting up for weeks and I'd kept putting off replacing it. "We'll go on foot," I said, already calculating the distance to the nearest road, over a mile through dense, uneven brush. Eileen stared at me, her legs shaking, just standing upright. Her arthritis had been getting worse, and we both knew she wouldn't make it more than 100 yards. The smoke thickened. The air tasted like metal and ash. I took a wet towel and wrapped it around her face, telling her to stay low, but the fire wasn't giving us time to plan. Embers started raining from the sky like fiery snowflakes. One landed on our wooden steps, instantly igniting a lick of flame that spread across the railing. I grabbed the hose and turned the valve. Nothing. The water pressure was dead. Somewhere a pipe must have already burst from the heat. We retreated inside, slamming the door shut behind us. Through the living room window, I could see our barn beginning to collapse in a swirl of smoke and fire. The wind roared, pushing the flames like a hurricane made of heat. Eileen collapsed onto the couch, coughing uncontrollably, tears streaking through the soot on her cheeks. I sat beside her, holding her hand, both of us frozen, not with fear, but with the weight of helplessness. There was no warning, no chance to prepare, just us, trapped in our home, while the world outside turned to fire. People often ask why we didn't leave sooner, why we stayed, even when the sky was warning us in colors no sky should ever have. It's easy to judge from a distance, When you're not the one standing in the doorway of a home that's held your entire life. When you're not watching your wife carefully wrap photographs in a pillowcase while the wind shakes the windows. The truth is, we'd faced wildfires before, plenty of times over the decades. Some close enough to smell, others just distant news stories playing out across county lines. Each time we were told to prepare, so we did. And each time the fire turned, changed direction, was contained, or simply fizzled before reaching us. After years of false alarms, you begin to believe your luck is something stronger than coincidence. You begin to believe you're safe. We weren't being stubborn. We were being human. Earlier that week, our neighbors, the Caldwells, packed up their camper and left. Jim Caldwell waved at me from the driver's seat and yelled, "You two coming?" I laughed and told him we'd hold down the fort. "Same as always," I added, and he nodded, used to the routine. Eileen and I joked that we'd see them in a few days, probably back in time to water their garden. They were smart to go. We weren't fools. We knew fire was dangerous. But we had no family nearby to take us in, and the idea of huddling in a high school gymnasium with hundreds of strangers during a false alarm felt like a cruel swap for the peace of our home. We told ourselves we'd leave if things got bad, that we'd see the danger in time. But fire doesn't wait for logic, and it certainly doesn't ask for permission. Another reason, though it's hard to admit, was pride. I'd built that house with my own two hands. Every wall, every nail, every beam of the roof had passed through my fingers. I couldn't imagine abandoning it. We had lived a life of resilience, fixing what was broken, saving what mattered, never giving up. Leaving felt like surrendering, like losing a part of ourselves. But deep down, I think we also stayed because we were afraid of letting go of the place where we raised our children, where Eileen planted her daffodils every spring, where we danced barefoot in the kitchen when the radio played our song. What we had wasn't just a house, it was memory, and memory can be heavier than any suitcase. We tried to act normal that last day. I mowed the lawn, as ridiculous as that sounds now. Eileen baked a pie, peach, her favorite. We sat on the porch and drank iced tea, watching the wind whip through the pines. We didn't speak much. We were both pretending in our own way that this wasn't real, that the alerts on the radio were just noise, just static, that it would all blow over like the other times. But something in the air was different. It wasn't just the color of the sky, it was the way the animals were acting. Squirrels running frantically from tree to tree, deer crashing through the underbrush in broad daylight. And the quiet, that awful pressing quiet, like the world was holding its breath. By the time we finally admitted the fire might be coming for us, it was too late. The roads had been closed, emergency crews were overwhelmed. We had no way out, and the last message I managed to get through to our daughter was broken by static and fear. "We're fine," I lied. "It's not that close." I said it because I didn't want to panic her. I said it because I believed somehow we could still ride it out. We thought we had time, but time in a firestorm collapses. Minutes stretch into eternities and then vanish in a flash of smoke. We were too slow to act, too reluctant to run, too rooted in the life we had built to imagine it turning to ash. That's the terrible irony of it. You think staying behind is a choice, but by the time you realize it isn't, the choice is no longer yours to make. It was the smell that changed everything. Until then, it had been smoke, sure, but distant, dry, lingering like a memory in the air. But when the fire reached our fence, the scent shifted. It turned sharp, chemical, almost sweet. The smell of living things burning, bark, branches, resin, life turning into ash. It crept in through the vents, the cracks beneath doors, the seams of the windows. The air inside the house, our supposed shelter, suddenly felt heavier, hotter. It clung to our skin like a warning. I stepped outside just long enough to see it with my own eyes. The line of flames, maybe 15 feet high, danced just beyond the trees at the edge of our property. Not a wall of fire, like the movies show you, but tongues, long and greedy, reaching through the branches, licking the dry grass, curling toward the wooden posts of our old fence. It moved fast, faster than any man could run. The wind was behind it now, pushing the flames forward with relentless, invisible hands. The forest wasn't just on fire, it was becoming fire. I ran back inside and told Eileen, "We're not safe here anymore." I saw it in her eyes. She already knew. We grabbed what we could, not valuables, just what made sense in the moment. Blankets, water bottles, our dog's leash, even though our dog had passed away 2 years earlier. Maybe some habits don't die until we're forced to let go of them. We had one idea left, the root cellar. It wasn't much. Just a small underground pantry we'd built decades ago for tornado warnings and canned goods. It had a thick wooden door and was dug into the cool earth behind the house. It wasn't fireproof, it wasn't designed for this, but it was all we had. We opened the back door and made a run for it. The heat hit us like a wall. It wasn't just temperature, it was pressure, like walking into an oven sealed shut. The light was orange, then red, then almost black. Smoke swirled low along the ground, turning every breath into a struggle. Eileen stumbled halfway across the yard. I caught her, helped her stand. Her hands trembled, her knees buckled, but we made it to the hatch. I yanked it open. Inside, the air was stale, but breathable. I lowered her down first, then followed, closing the door above us. We sat there in the dark, surrounded by old jars of pickled vegetables and shelves of dusty preserves. The only light came from a small flashlight I kept hanging on a hook, its beam flickering from age and weak batteries. It wasn't quiet. The fire roared above us like a living monster. We could hear trees falling, crashing in a series of distant, echoing thuds. Occasionally, a deep, hollow boom would shake the ground as if something enormous had collapsed. We didn't speak for a long time. We just held hands, both of us knowing but not saying that we might not come out again. The temperature inside the cellar began to rise, not rapidly but steadily, like a kettle set on low. Sweat pooled on my back. Eileen's breathing became shallow. I dampened 2 towels with what little water we had and pressed them against our mouths. My fingers were trembling. I wasn't sure if it was fear or heat stroke setting in. At some point, we heard a crackling above us, louder than before. Then, silence. It was the kind of silence that makes your heart beat louder in your ears. For a moment, I feared the worst, that the house had collapsed, that the fire had passed and we were buried beneath rubble and ash. I almost opened the hatch just to see, just to know. But the metal latch was red hot to the touch. We waited. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time lost all shape. I think we both started drifting in and out of consciousness. I remember hearing Eileen whisper my name, and I remember responding, but I don't know if it happened out loud or just in my mind. Eventually, the roar above began to fade. The air, while still thick and hot, felt survivable. I opened the hatch, slowly, using my shirt to shield my hand. The wood was charred. Smoke still drifted through the opening like the last breath of a dying storm. I peeked out. What I saw didn't look like home anymore. Our porch was gone. The garden was ash. The fence, burnt to black stumps. Trees still smoldered, some fallen in jagged angles like broken limbs. The air was grey, the sun a faint red dot behind layers of smoke. The house, our house, was still standing somehow. The roof had taken damage, one side was scorched, but it hadn't burned completely. We had survived, barely, but survival came with a cost. And as I stood there, helping Eileen out of the cellar and into this new silent world, I realized something deeply unsettling. There had been no sirens, no rescue, no help. No one had come. We were on our own. They say when death is near, your life flashes before your eyes. I don't know if that's true for everyone, but I remember one thing clearly. When I thought it was over, I didn't see my whole life. I saw her. I saw Eileen, just as she looked on our wedding day, barefoot in the grass, her hair braided with wildflowers, smiling like she already knew the years ahead would be hard but worth it. That single memory, like a still photograph in my mind, was what kept me from falling apart completely. It was after we came out of the cellar when we realized the fire hadn't truly passed. It had circled. While part of the blaze had swept through the trees behind the house, another wave had moved around from the east. In our desperate dash for the cellar, we hadn't seen that a second front had ignited near the old gas line at the edge of the property. It had crept in slow, silent, and lethal. We were coughing more by then. The air, even after the first firestorm had moved on, was filled with ash and smoke so dense we could barely see our own hands. The garden hose was melted. The generator had failed. My lungs burned. Every breath felt like inhaling needles. Eileen's voice, once firm even in fear, was barely a whisper. "Harold," she said, "my chest hurts." I could see it in her eyes. She was trying to stay calm for me, but she was fading. We went back inside thinking the worst had passed, but it hadn't. Flames were already crawling up the eastern side of the house. They spread through the dry grass, caught the shed, then leapt to the gutters. I remember hearing the sound, like popcorn in a skillet. Wood snapping, paint blistering. I grabbed a blanket, soaked it in the sink, and pressed it against the bottom of the front door where the heat was seeping in. The floorboards under our feet began to vibrate with a low, unnatural hum. I knew what it meant. The fire had entered the walls. We had nowhere else to go. I looked at Eileen, sitting on the couch with her arms around a pillow as if it were one of our grandchildren. Her skin was pale, her forehead glistening with sweat. "I don't think we're getting out of this one," I said quietly. I meant it as a thought, but the words escaped before I could stop them, and she just nodded, like she'd known all along. We went to the bedroom, the only room that hadn't yet been touched. I helped her lie down on the bed. I sat beside her, our fingers entwined, the air so thick it was hard to think. I tried to remember the first time I kissed her. I tried to remember the laughter of our children echoing through the halls. I tried to remember anything but the fire that was now roaring just beyond the walls. The ceiling cracked above us. That's when we said goodbye. Not aloud, not dramatically, but in that quiet way couples do when words are no longer needed. A squeeze of the hand, a glance, the softest nod. I closed my eyes. The heat was unbearable now. We both knew that if the flames didn't take us, the smoke would. And then, just when I thought this was it, I heard a new sound. Not fire, not wind, voices. At first, I thought it was in my head, hallucinations maybe. But they grew louder, clearer. Someone was calling out. A man's voice followed by another. Boots on gravel, the sound of a door being forced open. Suddenly, the front door burst inward and smoke poured through the hall. A figure appeared, silhouetted against the haze. Thick jacket, oxygen tank, helmet. A firefighter. "Is anyone alive in here?" he shouted. I couldn't speak. I tried to raise my arm, but my body didn't respond. Eileen whispered something, and somehow he heard. He came running. He scooped her up in his arms like she weighed nothing and shouted to someone outside. "We've got a woman. There's another inside." I don't remember how they pulled me out. Just the cold rush of oxygen against my face. The sky above me was a strange mix of orange and grey, with specks of black snow drifting through the air. I remember coughing so hard I couldn't breathe, and then suddenly I could. The mask sealed over my mouth. The breath was sharp, clean. It hurt in a different way, because it meant I was still here. We both were. They laid us side by side on the ground, wrapped in silver blankets. The house behind us, though damaged and smoking, still stood. But even if it had burned to the ground, that moment, seeing Eileen's eyes blink open through the oxygen mask, her hand reaching for mine, meant everything. That was the moment I knew we hadn't just survived a fire. We had survived our own surrender. And somehow, against every cruel chance, we were still breathing. I never even saw his face. That's the part that haunts me most. You'd think someone who pulls you out of hell would become burned into your memory forever. But with the smoke, the noise, the fear, all I really remember is the outline. A dark figure standing tall against a backdrop of flames, moving like he wasn't afraid, like he'd done this before. And maybe he had. Maybe this was just another house in another fire to him. But to us, he wasn't just a rescuer, he was a miracle. He shouldn't have been there. That's what we later found out. Officially, our area had been deemed too dangerous for response crews to enter. The radio had said as much hours before. The roads were closed, and the fire had cut off the main access route. The other homes around us were already gone. Everyone had fled days ago, everyone except us. So what was he doing there? We never got a name, but I remember his voice. Calm, clipped, decisive. "I've got her," he said as he lifted Eileen. I can still hear that sentence echoing in my head. There was no hesitation in it, no panic, just certainty. He carried her out the front door while calling for backup. Another figure emerged from the smoke behind him. A second firefighter, younger, eyes wide, unsure. "There's someone else," the first man said. "Inside, bedroom." That was me. I was barely conscious. I remember drifting in and out of awareness, my vision spinning, my lungs aching for breath. I saw the boots first, then the gloved hands reaching for my arm. "You're okay," the voice said. "I've got you." I wanted to respond. I wanted to say thank you, but all I could do was nod as he dragged me toward the hallway, shielding my face with his coat. The floorboards creaked, threatening to give way under us. I remember the flash of a falling beam, the roar of flames as the wall behind us collapsed. He never slowed down. Somewhere near the porch, the second firefighter appeared again. He helped lift me by the shoulders, and together they hauled me out into the open air. My lungs gave in the moment the oxygen mask was pressed against my face. I coughed so hard, I thought my chest would crack in half, but it was the first real breath I'd had in what felt like hours. They laid me down next to Eileen, and I remember gripping her hand again. She was crying, not out of pain, but out of relief. I was too. I looked up, trying to see him, the man who had found us, but by the time my eyes could focus, he was already walking away, a silhouette dissolving into the smoke again. No name, no recognition, just gone. Later, at the emergency shelter, one of the volunteers told us she'd overheard something on the radio chatter. "There was a guy," she said. "Off duty, I think. Heard there might still be someone trapped out near the old trailhead. Told his captain he couldn't sleep, knowing he hadn't checked. Took a rig and went out alone. Not protocol, but..." She trailed off, then added, "If he hadn't, well, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I wish I could tell you we ever found him." We asked, of course, called the station, wrote letters. No one could tell us who had been on that shift. Some claimed it was a rookie mistake. Others said they weren't authorized to say. One woman at the firehouse just smiled and said, "You're not the first ones to ask that about a rescue we didn't send. We don't know if he was real. Maybe that sounds strange. But in the quiet moments, Eileen and I talk about him like you'd talk about a ghost. Not a scary one, but a guardian. Someone who shows up only when there's no one else, when all the doors are closed and the flames are too high. He could have turned around. He could have waited for orders. He could have said, 'It's too late.' But instead he came, through the smoke, through the fire, and because of that we're still here." The house was still standing when they wheeled us back up the hill a week later, but it wasn't a home anymore. The porch had collapsed, the roof was half burned away, the kitchen was gutted, the cabinets and walls reduced to char and soot. Our garden was nothing but grey dust, scattered with bits of melted metal and glass that once belonged to watering cans, planters, bird feeders. We didn't cry when we saw it. I think we had already done all our crying in that root cellar, in the bedroom, on the ground wrapped in those emergency blankets. What was left now was silence, the kind that arrives not with tragedy, but with acceptance. The fire had taken nearly everything. The photo albums, the hand-carved dresser from Eileen's grandfather, the quilt her mother had sewn when we were first married. A lifetime of things. But we were still here, both of us, breathing. That alone felt miraculous. We stayed in a temporary shelter at first, a large community center filled with rows of cots and the echo of dozens of quiet conversations. Eileen's voice was weak for days, and my lungs were still recovering from the smoke inhalation. Volunteers brought us soup, dry socks, toothbrushes. The smallest things we hadn't thought about in decades, suddenly meant everything. One young woman gave Eileen a clean blanket, soft and blue. Eileen clutched it like it was gold. People we didn't know came from other towns with food, clothes, even pet supplies for animals that had made it out. Strangers hugged us. Some cried when we told our story. Others told us their own. One man had lost his brother. A woman had lost her horse barn and the animals inside. Somehow, despite all of it, they smiled. They were still kind, and that kindness, it did something to us. After a few weeks, we were moved into a small rental cottage about 40 minutes from our land. Nothing fancy. One bedroom, a tiny stove that clicked before it lit. But it was clean, warm, and had a window that looked out onto a little patch of green. That window became our new ritual. Every morning we sat beside it, not in silence, but in conversation. We talked about things we hadn't said in years, about the years we struggled to pay the mortgage, about the time our son broke his arm falling out of the maple tree, about the way we always said we'd travel, but never did. The fire had taken our house, yes, but it had also stripped away all the distractions, all the excuses. We saw each other differently now. Not just as husband and wife, but as survivors, as people who had been broken open by fire and filled again with something more powerful than certainty, gratitude. Eventually, our daughter and grandchildren flew in. I'll never forget the moment the kids saw Eileen for the first time since the fire. They ran to her, wrapping their little arms around her legs, asking if the house really burned down, if the trees were all gone. And she smiled, pulling them close, saying, "Yes, but it's okay, because we're still here and now we get to start again." We decided not to rebuild on the same land. It felt like it belonged to another chapter of our lives. Instead, we donated part of it to a local wildlife recovery fund. They're planting trees there now, trees that will take decades to grow, but we like knowing they'll outlive us. That something green will rise again from all that ash. The truth is, we did lose everything. At least everything we thought we couldn't live without. But in losing it, we uncovered something deeper. We found resilience we didn't know we had. We found community in people we'd never met. We found time, not in the sense of hours and days, but in the way we now use each moment, fully present, no longer waiting for tomorrow. And most of all, we found each other again. Not as the tired couple going through routines in an old house, but as two people who remembered, through fire and fear, why they chose to stay and what made it worth surviving for. So yes, the fire took our past, but it gave us back our future. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring real stories like mine to people who need hope. Leave a comment. Have you ever faced something that changed your life forever? I read every one. And remember, sometimes surviving the fire is only the beginning.